All right, so hello, my name is Dr. Cordell Spears. Hopefully everybody can hear me properly and see the PowerPoint presentation. Um, like I said, my name is Dr. Cordell Spears. I'm from Texas State University Counseling Center, and I will be doing a presentation over anxiety, basically. The title of the presentation is Nothing to Fear, Coping Skills to Hear. And the purpose of this is for you to learn how to manage the physiological and cognitive impacts of anxiety. So just a little background information about me, a little personal disclosure in terms of why, I picked this particular topic to present on. One is one of the areas I like to work with. I like to work with students I like to work with all students, but a lot of my clients are students who struggle with anxiety, because I struggled with anxiety when I was young, in particular, like social anxiety. I think, and everybody struggles with anxiety to some degree, right? Everybody experiences anxiety, and anxiety is a normal human function. So if you get anything from this presentation, hopefully you get that anxiety is normal, is not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to be embarrassed of. And hopefully you gather some techniques to use too to help manage anxiety. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to be able to actually run through a lot of the techniques, like the relaxation skills that I talk about. I will try to run through bits of like maybe some deep breathing and maybe a part of progressive muscle relaxation, but due to time constraints, I won't be able to do that. Also, there's a Q&A a part of this too. Hopefully, I can leave at least 10 minutes and answer any questions at the end of our presentation. So there should be a Q&A box. If you could just like put your question in there, either me or Eli will answer them. I think Eli will be answering some throughout the presentation, and I will answer the rest at the end. So let's get on start. So before I begin, also, the goals of this presentation is to learn about the physiological reasons we experience anxiety and the cognitive reasons we experience anxiety. What are some of the biological mechanisms and evolutionary reasons for anxiety, and also learn how to cope with anxiety. So the first things first is I really want to kind of talk about the difference between anxiety and fear, because some people think they're the same, and they're not actually. Fear is a automatic response to a specific object, situation, or circumstance that involves recognition of an actual or potential danger, right? For example, for someone who has arachnophobia, they're going to experience fear to anything related to spiders, right? The possibility that there's the presence of a spider. If they see a spider web, an older house, walking in the forest, those things may elicit fear, right? Anxiety is a much more prolonged, complex emotional state, right? So that's often triggered by fear, right? So that's one thing to understand, that anxiety is more of a complex reaction to something that you may initially fear. Like anxiety is more endearing. It's more, it's more enduring, and it's more prolonged. In a general sense, fear is if you want to like kind of summarize it, basically fear is a reaction to a specific object or like person or situation. Anxiety is more of a diffuse and unfocused, future-oriented fear, or future-oriented feeling. Anxiety is more about, a lot of times we feel more anxious about the potential of the possibility of something happening in the future, while fear is a reaction to something more imminent. So I think that's the first thing to understand is, like the difference between the two, because part of being able to work through your anxiety is actually identifying what is the core fear of my anxiety, like what is driving my anxiety. Because like I said earlier, we experience anxiety a lot of times because of some type of initial fear. So identifying the fear that drives your anxiety. So that's probably the first thing you want to look at. So let's unravel anxiety. So the first things first is try not to feel shame or embarrassment from your anxiety, about your anxiety. That's the first step in overcoming your anxiety, is getting past that shame, that embarrassment. You know, some people feel, you know, treat it as if it's something to hide in the closet, you know, hide in the closet as a secret or something like that. And what that does is, one, that reinforces the anxiety, right? It treats it as something secretive that you shouldn't share with others. But also it prevents you from possibly taking steps to address the anxiety. You simply try to push it, you try to push it back instead of actually addressing it, working on addressing it. Because I want you to understand, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, like anxiety is a normal human response. Everybody experiences anxiety. Your peers, the faculty members you encounter, the staff members you encounter, your family members. Yeah, everybody in your life that you've came across has experienced anxiety to some degree. Okay. Maybe not to the same degree that you experience it, or they might not be anxious about the same situations or people or objects that you feel anxious about. But everybody to some degree experiences anxiety. Also, anxiety is evolutionary. It's biological too. So, we're gonna go a little bit more into this, like what is called the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that governs over systems that we have no control over. So a lot of times you have no control over if you're experiencing anxiety initially or not, right? It's a biological thing. It governs this autonomic nervous system governs such systems as your heart rate, your breathing rate, your digestive system, and so on. So when you look at the autonomic nervous systems, there's two parts of it. There's the sympathetic nervous system. There's the parasympathetic nervous system. Right? When your brain views something as a potential threat, it triggers that sympathetic nervous system, and what happens is the fight or flight response gets activated. Okay, and that's why that last bullet point I said it's all about fight or flight, or fight or flight or freeze. All right, you can add freeze on there. Once that fight or flight system gets activated, the body mobilizes to fight or run. Right, it mobilizes to fight or run. And this system can literally save a person's life when they're in danger, right? So a lot of times we experience with this system, when the system is activated, that's that increased heart rate, that's the sweating, your blood pressure rises, your digestive system might shut down, your eyes, the pupils of them might dilate, and so on, right? That's because that fight or flight system is getting you ready to it's trying to give you the energy to to run or fight. So more about the fight or flight response. So these symptoms might look familiar, right? So this is another thing, like you want to to be able to fight off anxiety, you also want to be able to identify like what symptoms you experience, because that's kind of going to suggest what route of treatment you want to go through, or what route of different methods or techniques you want to use to counter the anxiety. If you're feeling more, physiological symptoms, relaxation may be the route to go. If you're experiencing more cognitive symptoms, then more you might want to use more cognitive or more mindfulness based techniques, right? So the cardiovascular effects: rapid beating of the heart, rapid breathing, increase in perspiration, muscle tone, decrease in digestive system, dry mouth. Some people experience dry mouth when they're anxious, and so on. Now, none of these symptoms particularly feel good, right? But a lot of people don't realize also that these symptoms at one time they played a role in helping us survive, and they still play a role in helping us survive. But in a modern, like in the modern world that we live in, a lot of these symptoms actually get in the way than help, right? People don't always benefit from the fight or flight response. This response being activated. The reason why I say that is the dangers we face today typically are more psychological, social, and financial. They're not, these symptoms were meant for if we're in physical danger, right? So for example, if a bear is chasing you, you won't be, there's a reason these symptoms actually are, whether you know it or not, they're there to actually help you fight or run from the bear. And I'll explain what I mean in just a minute. Like I say, the dangers that we face today are more psychological, social, and financial rather than physical. So these symptoms, the fight or flight system is not going to help with a threat of losing your job necessarily. That's a common thing we might experience. Or you fail in a test. The system is not useful for those type of things. But our brain treats you losing a job or you failing the test as if it is as if that is something fatal, and as such. So a lot of so going through some of these symptoms. So like if you're being chased by a bear, and I'm going to go over some of the evolutionary reasons why we experience these symptoms. So if you're being chased by a bear, you might experience a rapid beating of the heart. Why might that be useful? Well, to pump more blood to the different organs and muscle groups in your body, right? To help with fight or flight. Rapid breathing, right? Getting more oxygen so you can have more energy. Increase in perspiration, like sweating, right? Why do we sweat? Like if a bear is chasing you, how is sweating going to be helpful? Well, one, maybe to cool you down, but also a lot of people don't think about this too. Like if something's like chasing you and it's trying to grab a hold of you and you're sweating, it's harder to get a firm grip on you, right? Increase in muscle tone. Like some people experience muscle tension when they get anxious. And the reason why is your body, once again, that sympathetic nervous system is sending messages to increase muscle tone so that you can be as strong as possible to fight off this bear or to run as fast as you. Decrease in digestion. Your body, like when you're anxious, your body's gonna shut off your digestive system because it's not useful. It's not necessary. Like that's wasted energy. It wants to divert energy to other systems in your body. Widening of pupils. That's going to allow you to see in the dark better, or like enhance your ability to search for danger. And then there's the drive to escape, dizziness, tingling or numbness in some people feel like a tingling or numbness or cold hands, and such. That's because the blood, your body's directing blood more so to your away from the surface of those limbs, more to the muscle groups in your body, and so on. So those are some of the adaptive reasons why we experience those symptoms. But as you could tell, like I said earlier, that's not going to help with the threat of you losing a job, or the threat of you failing a test, or the threat of you losing a relationship and such. Right? As complex as complex as the brain is, and it has a lot of abilities that we haven't even tapped into. It's not really good at deciphering like a threat that's necessarily fatal from a threat that's not so much, or a threat that was adaptive maybe back in the prehistoric ages, from what we typically struggle with now. So let's get a little bit more technical. So basically, when you're under stress, or you're anxious, or you experience fear, there's a chain reaction of physical and chemical processes in the body that prepare you to fight or flight. Remember, that's the sympathetic nervous system. So the brain recognizes there's a threat in your environment, right? So it's going to send messages to the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is a part of your brain that typically is responsible for monitoring and controlling the endocrine system in your body, or the releasing of hormones and the such. So the hypothalamus is going to release these I never pronounced this word right, but it's corticotropic hormone releasing factor. And this in turn is going to stimulate the master gland, the pituitary gland, to release these adrenal corticotropic hormones, right? And that's going to this is when cortisol is going to get released, adrenaline and noradrenaline and the such. And these chemicals in turn serve to accelerate your pulse rate, elevate your blood pressure, and stimulate the central nervous system, right? Noradrenaline is going to constrict your peripheral blood vessels and inhibit the gastrointestinal activity. So so the net effect of these chemicals is increased blood pressure and blood flow to the skeletal muscles, so that you once again can fight or run, prepare you for the fight or flight. So the reason why I bring all that up is just not to like tell you, because I'm not a biologist or anything like that and such, and such. But the reason why I bring that all up is it's important to realize you are just being human. Like, so when you experience anxiety and such, you're just being human. Unfortunately, friends, family members, physicians, and sometimes even counselors and psychologists will tell you that your anxiety is all in your mind. That's not true. It's the mind and body, right? It's our mind in our body, in our brain, in nerve cells, the bloodstream. There's so many parts of the body that play a role in anxiety. It's not necessarily just, it's not a you thing. It's a body thing, right? So that's the reason why I want to go over that information, right? Another thing to think about, like when we're talking about, let me actually go back. Going back to you are just being human, and what also plays a role in anxiety is, like I said, the mind and the body and all that, but also genetics too. Like there's certain anxiety can run in families too, right? Anxiety can run in families, and also like experience of like childhood trauma can leave somebody predisposed to experiencing anxiety later in life also. So once again, it's not all about, sometimes it's not all in your head. There's so many different factors that play into anxiety, and it's not your fault that you experience anxiety. That's why I want to go over that. So an anxious mind. So anxiety impacts the way you think too. So when people are anxious, their minds are more likely to focus on dangerous and threatening situations. Similar to like when you struggle with depression or sadness. Like if you struggle with those things, you're more than likely to pay attention to things that are congruent with how you feel. So when people struggle with anxiety or have a tendency to get anxious, they tend to focus on like things that provoke anxiety in their environment, right? And it becomes more difficult to think think in a purely and neutral in positive way, even if those things are available. Events that are ambiguous. Now, people who struggle with anxiety also, when they encounter a situation that's when they encounter a situation that is hard to decipher if it's harmful or non-harmful, an ambiguous situation, a lot of times the brain is going to jump to the conclusion that this is a dangerous situation, right? Because your brain is going to, a lot of times, remember, it's all about survival, and it's going to see these ambiguous situations as potentially dangerous, because the cost of not seeing that way may be greater, like maybe fatal, right? Because it's about trying to protect you, right? And then there's these anxious thought patterns that we experience. So a lot of times, like people that struggle with anxiety, there's certain thought patterns that actually encourage anxiety. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but these are just some of the ones to think about. I don't have them listed up here, but I can say them, and you can easily look these up on Google and such. But catastrophic thinking, right? That's one. It's another way of thinking about it, or labeling it, spiraling. Some people who worry a lot, their thoughts spiral. They think about what else, or the worst case scenario thinking. That's another way. That's another label for catastrophic thinking. There's also like jumping to conclusions. Like people who struggle with social anxiety know exactly what I'm talking about. Like if you struggle with social anxieties, a lot of times we jump to conclusions. Like we try to mind read. We try to read our audience, or read the people around us, or fortune tell. I struggled with social anxiety for a long time, and these are things I used to engage in, and the such, and that will make me anxious. Blowing things out of proportion, overgeneralizing, basically using a past negative event, maybe an event that caused like some form of anxiety, and predicting future events based off the event. A lot of times that can encourage anxiety too. So anxiety impacts the way you think also. So, so I talked about like number one, identifying your core fear. You want to identify your core fear. Realizing your anxiety is normal. So I think those are the first two steps you want to do when fighting off anxiety, right? And then understanding anxiety, right? Understanding the biological mechanisms that play a role in your anxiety. The next thing is like befriend your anxiety. I know that's kind of weird to think about, but a lot of times we think about how anxiety negatively impacts us. But if it is adaptive, and there was an evolutionary reason why we experience anxiety, and it is there to help. Like, what ways does it help you out? Actually, it's important to think about this. Like safety, your anxiety is out there for protection. It's there to protect you. Have you ever been in a dark alley and you feel like somebody's following you and there's someone behind you? That's your brain. It's like a spidey sense. If you watch Spider-Man or something like that. It's helping you pinpoint danger, so protect you. Preparation, your anxiety helps you prepare. So an aspect of motivation is, preparing for that presentation, preparing for that big exam. We get anxious about, our anxiety helps us like prepare for those things. Attention, basically our anxiety helps us determine what we should attend to in our environment, what we should not attend to, what's important and what's not important. Right? So anxiety is there for that too. It also helps us change our perspective, and this plays a role in motivation in preparation too. And what I mean by that is, it helps us see things a little differently too. A lot of times, we can actually use anxiety as a motivational technique, right? So, for example, so like presentations, I used to get I was really anxious about presentations, to the point where when I was younger, I would skip them because they caused so much anxiety, and that negatively impacted my grades and everything, right? I had a friend though, she would experience anxiety too, but it was more of a excitatory anxiety, right? Because we saw presentations differently. Like I saw it as a chance for me to, mess up, to fail at something. She saw it as a way to show what she knows and to like spread wisdom to other people. So therefore, her anxiety motivated her. My anxiety demotivated me, and led to me feeling dread. So anxiety can actually, once again, lead to motivation and such. So going a little bit more on motivation, actually, this is speaking of motivation. So if you're a psychology major, you probably heard of the Yerkes-Dodson law. Basically, to summarize this, a moderate amount of stress, arousal, anxiety leads to optimal performance. So that's another way anxiety is adaptive, because there's a lot of research that shows that experiencing a moderate amount of anxiety leads to us performing at our best, right? Too little stress, arousal, or anxiety leads to low motivation and poor performance, right? Because if you're not anxious about it, more than likely you don't care, right? So therefore, you're not going to attend to it, and therefore, you're not going to prepare for it, right? So, and then too much stress or anxiety or arousal leads to high anxiety, which could negatively impair your performance. So I think about Michael Jordan. So I'm a huge sports fanatic because he even admitted that he would get anxious a little bit before games, right? Before big games, and but that allowed him to prepare, to practice, and the such. It made him alert during games and during practice, engaged, and so on, right? So he experienced that moderate amount of anxiety and such. So you're probably like, Cordell, so you talked about like why I should befriend my anxiety, why it's helpful, why it's adaptive and such. But I think my anxiety might be a problem, or like, when do I know, Cordell, like when my anxiety is a problem? So when is anxiety problematic, and when should you seek out help? To answer that second part of that question, you can seek out help at any point. I think it's helpful to intercept anxiety as early as possible, as early as you can. So at any level of anxiety, you can come to the counseling center and we'll help you, because I don't know if students know this, or faculty or anything. I'm not sure. Anxiety is the number one presenting concern we see at the counseling center. Anxiety and stress. Those are the two things we see. Those are the most common things we see at the counseling center, because you're on an academic environment where a lot of people care about their grades and such. So there's a lot of students, there's a lot of your peers that are anxious, right? So you can see us at any time. So when is anxiety necessarily problematic? Well, I would say like exaggerated intensity is one thing. So is your anxiety proportionate to the situation, right? Are you experiencing panic attacks when a snail, when you see a snail on the sidewalk? I would say that response is probably not proportionate to the object, right? Or are you experiencing a lot of anxiety when making a phone call or crossing a bridge? What is the proportion of it? Does the proportion of the emotional experience match the feared object, situation, or person and such? Persistence. How long is your anxiety response lasting? I would say like it might be a problem. You might want to working on your anxiety if you're anxious like almost all day. You're feeling on edge all day. It's normal to worry from time to time. Worrying is just part of being human. But if you're like all day, every day encountering this, then it may not be. It may be a problem. Interference. How much is your anxiety interfering with your daily responsibility, your ability to carry out your daily responsibilities? Your academic, job, social responsibilities and such. Panic. It's normal for people to experience panic attacks. People experience panic attacks. People who struggle with anxiety, don't struggle with anxiety, experience panic attacks at times. But how frequent are they? Are they spontaneous? They're pretty random, and you're experiencing them like 2 to 3 times a week? There might be a problem there. I mentioned catastrophic thinking. Are you engaging in this worst case scenario thing, type of thought process all the time? Does it feel like you're more focused on those thoughts than actually, behaving and engaging? Avoidance. Are you avoiding things that make you feel anxious? And how is that impacting your quality of life? Are you enjoying life? Is your anxiety causing you to feel lonely? If you struggle with social anxiety, you're anxious about social situations, are you now lonely because your anxiety is keeping you away from things? Loss of safety or feeling calm. Is it tough for you to self-soothe yourself? Is it difficult for you to bring yourself back down when you are anxious? And then I think the big thing is your anxiety making decisions for you? That's when I think it's time to definitely work on your anxiety. when it starts making decisions for you. And what I mean, like, for example, if, like, let's say I had 2 job interviews, and I went to them, and they both companies gave me an offer. One company, I love the people that I would potentially be working with. I love the environment. The pay is good. The commute is good. But there's something, there's one job task that makes me really anxious. It makes me really anxious. I experience a lot of anxiety with this job task. Let's say job number 2, lower pay. I don't get along with the people as well. I don't vibe with the culture as well there. Lower, like I said, lower pay. The commute is long, but there's no job task that makes me feel anxious at this job. If I choose job number 2, I probably need to start working on my anxiety, because right there, my anxiety made a choice for me. And then if it starts to impact your immune system, like a lot of people, like cortisol, I went over earlier about those chemicals that get released when we're anxious. Prolonged exposure to cortisol actually impacts your ability, like your health and your energy levels. I know my mom used to say, like, stress, anxiety, can make you sick, or it can kill you, and such. Well, there's a nugget of truth to it making you sick. It can impact your immune system. Like, too much cortisol in the body, in the bloodstream, actually wears down your immune system. You're liable to get sick, and a lot of times you're liable to get fatigued too. So if you notice that and you struggle with anxiety, then it's probably anxiety might be something to work on. So first things for your anxiety is normal. Realize that, intercept it early. Be aware that you're not alone in this. So just basically normalize your anxiety, befriend your anxiety, like I said earlier. So, some of the anxiety management techniques, the first thing I would probably start with is relaxation. I would probably start with relaxation. There's different types of relaxation skills. There's more than I listed here. But, one is regulating your breathing. What you're trying to do is you're trying to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. You remember I went over earlier that there's 2 parts of the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system that triggers that fight or flight response system. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which actually does the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. Your parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to bring the body back to homeostasis, and also induce relaxation. So one way to trigger that is to engage in deep breathing, regulate your breathing. That's one of the first things you want to get at. And there's different types of deep breathing techniques. One is square breathing. There's another one called the 3 breath technique. We can kind of run through one real quickly. So I'm gonna run through. You can, I can't see you, so you can engage in this if you want to. But it's called the 3-part breath. So what you would do is just close your eyes, right? And you would place your hand on your belly without pressing on it. And you would allow yourself to feel your belly rise and fall. Feel your belly rise with each inhale and release on each exhale. So let's do it again. Inhale, and then when ready, exhale, completely drawing your belly in. Now let's inhale deeply. As you inhale, feel your belly expand. Puff out your belly like a balloon. Okay, it should feel like a balloon. And then exhale very slowly. Make the exhale slower than the inhale. I think that's the important part. Continue to exhale, completely drawing your belly in. So let's do it again. Inhale deeply, taking in air, filling up your belly. Continue to take in more air, filling up your chest. Feel your chest expand. Exhale slowly. Relax the chest and slowly draw your belly in. So you would do that for another time. That's why it's called the 3-part breath. And there's another one called square breathing. There's other types of breathing. You just want to find something that works for you. So if that didn't work, there's other types of breathing exercises out there. And that's another thing I want to bring up, is that not every exercise is going to work for you. That's the one thing about anxiety management, is that it's not one tool, works for everyone. It's not one size fits all, you're trying to find what works for you, trying to build your own anxiety toolkit, and everybody's toolkit is usually unique. There's also progressive muscle relaxation. So if you notice that you get anxious and then you struggle with muscle tension, this is a really good technique to do. A lot of times I've done this with many students before, and when I worked with adolescents too, I used to do this with adolescents, and they would either fall asleep in the chair that they were doing this in, or they would. I had one particular. I remember a person that told me that they felt like a noodle afterwards. They felt really limp afterwards, which is good. I'm not going to run through this because it's pretty long. These progressive muscle relaxation techniques typically take about 20 minutes, So while you're doing this technique for the first time, I think it's really important that if you're anxious and you're doing this for the first time, try to pay attention and pinpoint areas in your body that are tense, because as you use this technique more and more, you can just jump to that muscle group that's tense when you're anxious and work on that. So with progressive muscle relaxation, all you're doing is you're going throughout each muscle group and you're tensing, and you're learning how to tense and untense those muscles. As simple as that. And there's different scripts on YouTube you can use for that. You can use that can guide you along the exercise. Like a lot of these there's a variety of deep breathing techniques on YouTube, and progressive muscle relaxation and so on. Guided relaxation is pretty easy just to do on your own too, without any outside voice or anything guiding you through. All you're doing with guided relaxation is basically you're thinking of a safe space. So I want you to think of a safe space. Like it could be the beach, it can be at your grandparents' home, it could be in a park, a place that in the past or currently that brings you calm and peace. And what you're going to do is you're going to involve all your senses to make that place real in your mind, right? Make it real in your mind so that when you're anxious, you can go back to this place. You can always just close your eyes and think of this place and involve your senses to make it real as if you're there. And basically you'll feel better. You'll feel less anxious, right? So that's another one. And then also I just put in yoga. Yoga, like certain types of yoga may lead to you feeling relaxed, of course. Massages, acupuncture, there's different types of relaxation activities or skills you can use. The point of these skills is you want to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. It's based on a lot of these skills and stuff are based off of classical conditioning. So if you're a psychology major, you probably know what that is. They're based off of classical conditioning, in particular, reciprocal inhibition, which basically states that you can't be anxious and relax at the same time. A lot of times the relaxation is going to overcome the anxiety. So if you struggle more so physiologically with anxiety, you want to get a grip on some relaxation skills. There's also some mindfulness skills too. So anxiety, there's mindfulness skills. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard of mindfulness. It's a skill set that comes from like Far Eastern spiritual traditions such as like Buddhism and the such. So it's based off of that. And the idea behind mindfulness is, the purpose of mindfulness is to help ground you in the here and now, right? Our anxiety, like I mentioned earlier, one of the definitions, the distinction between anxiety and fear is that our anxiety is typically future oriented, right? These skills help ground you in the here and now, not only in your environment, but in your internal world too, like what you're feeling internally, like your emotions, what thoughts you're having. And it's going to these skills teach you how to approach those experiences, those sensations in a non-judgmental way. Right? So these are some techniques too. There's the body scan, right? So basically with the body scan, you're laying down and you're closing your eyes, you're breathing, you're focusing on your breathing, and you can start with any part of your body, and you just really, all you're doing is just noticing, you're really focusing, you're noticing any type of sensations you're feeling in that particular part of your body. So let's say I start with my foot. I'm noticing any type of feeling, sensations, discomfort, pain in my foot, and I'm just acknowledging it without judging, right? Really focusing in on that pain or that discomfort or feeling, and breathing through it, breathing through the tension, breathing through the pain and such in my foot area. And then I move to another body part and so on. This can take a while, but like I said, the purpose of it is to ground you in the here and now. The observer meditation, a specific meditation to use. There's a 5 senses technique. This is another grounding skill where you're basically simply using your senses to orient yourself in the here and now. So what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can hear? What are 3 things you can smell? What are 2 things you can touch? What are what is something you can taste? Or if you can't taste, if there's nothing to taste, like what is something you would love to taste? So that's another one. Mindfulness walking. Have you ever just this is something we don't normally do. Have you ever just took a walk and really focus on your environment? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Really engage yourself in the here and now, right? Because a lot of times when we're walking to class or walking to work or something like that, we're thinking about other things. We're thinking about what we could be doing or what we did do, and a lot of times those things lead to anxiety. So really honing in on your experience, walking. Stopping the war within script. This is a script you can look at that I use with students that enhances, not only fights off anxiety, but it also enhances self-compassion too, in the such. Repetitive prayers. Even if you're not a religious or spiritual person, simply repeating positive self-statements in a repetitive manner can help with anxiety also. If you do, or if you are religious or spiritual, maybe picking a excerpt or something from the religious text that you adhere to, picking that out and repetitively praying, it helps bring a sense of a calm and such, because you're engaging yourself fully in that prayer or that statement. So anxiety means changing non-helpful thought patterns. So as a psychologist, I actually work from a standpoint called cognitive behavioral therapy. So a lot of times I believe that our difficult emotions, CBT clinician is going to believe that our difficult emotions are influenced or sometimes even caused by the way we're thinking, right? The thinking processes we have, right? And that in turn is going to impact the way we behave in certain situations too. So these are some of the things you can do. If you notice yourself engaging in catastrophic thinking, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralizing, let's challenge those thoughts, right? I know this is something we don't normally do. We don't normally practice metacognition. Metacognition is basically thinking about your thinking. You're evaluating your thinking. This is not something we normally do, but this can help with anxiety. If you notice yourself engaging in some of those anxiety-provoking thoughts, challenge those thoughts. What would you tell a friend or a family member if they was having that thought that created anxiety? What is the evidence to support that thought? What is the evidence that goes against that thought? You're being a scientist. You're basically looking at evidence, weighing evidence for and against that thought. What's you're playing a probability game or a percentage game. What's the probability of this actually happening? What's the probability of them actually laughing at me while I give a presentation? What's the probability of that? You'll probably find yourself rating things a little bit too high. What's another way to think about the situation? What's the alternative ways to think about this specific situation, and so on. So those are some of the questions you can ask yourself to fight some of these thoughts. Practicing positive self-statement. So I know this is kind of like therapist talk and kind of cliche, but these actually do play. If you're trying to change those thoughts that are creating anxiety, this is actually pretty effective, man. Not for everybody, but like I said, it's pretty effective. Um, sometimes I have students like come up with their own positive self-statements, or we look up some on the internet that applies to their specific situation that creates anxiety, and we write a statement. We write it on a note card, and they carry it in their backpacks or purses or wallets. And whenever they feel anxious and they notice themselves engaging in those non-helpful thought patterns, they pull it out and they read it. It actually helps. The thing is with these specific techniques is you might not feel the immediate impact, because what you're doing actually is you're fighting off. You're basically changing neural pathways in your brain. Like, so you're breaking apart old ways of thinking, old pathways, and creating new pathways, which takes time. So it's kind of like learning an instrument. Like you don't learn an instrument overnight. It takes a while. It takes practice. So a lot of these techniques, you might not get immediate impact off of them, but the more you do them, and the more new ways of neural pathways you're creating in the brain, the more likely they're going to stick. Set aside a worry time. If worrying is something you struggle with, don't fight against it. Or like I said, worrying is a normal part of being human. So instead of fighting against it, maybe set aside a time, designate a time to worry, maybe at 6 o'clock. Let's say I designate a time at 6 o'clock for an hour, I'm going to worry. And I'm going to worry to my heart's content for that whole hour. The idea is that you worry so much during that designated time that you're too exhausted to worry anymore after that, right? So you're not necessarily trying to fight against something that's human. You're engaging in it, but you're designating a specific time for it. And then journaling and such. I know that's, once again, that's cliche therapist talk, but journaling helps too, because you're externalizing those thoughts that are creating anxiety and such. Some behavioral techniques. The golden rule, if you get anything from this specific presentation, is avoid avoiding, right? Avoiding is the number one reinforcer in terms of anxiety. Like, because when we avoid, we feel better temporarily. We feel better temporarily. But what ends up happening is avoiding reinforces the anxiety. It actually could make the situation worse. Like if you're avoiding this paper, you're avoiding writing this paper because you're anxious about it, right? And then you wait till the last minute to do it. You're going to feel more anxiety, right? So you want to avoid avoiding. There's different techniques that you can use. A lot of these, though, I would say you want to probably use with a professional, but some of these you can do on your own. So great, like exposure and response prevention is actually the number one technique for fighting off specific phobias or like specific anxieties, right? So like arachnophobia or social anxiety and such. So what you're doing is it's simple. You're exposing yourself to whatever makes you feel anxious, and you're not avoiding. Right? You're either sitting with the anxiety or you're doing some type of relaxation skill to manage the anxiety. Right? You're basically teaching your brain, you're creating, once again, a new neural pathway. You're teaching your brain, this is not something to fear. This is not something to be anxious about. Graded exposure is you're exposing yourself to something you fear in a graded measure. So you're creating like a hierarchy of fears. Let's say my fear was public speaking, right? So I'm gonna create a hierarchy. I'm gonna start with the situation related to public speaking that creates the least anxiety, speaking in front of 2 people. And I'm ending with something that creates the most anxiety, speaking in front of 100 people. And I'm gonna start at the bottom, manage my anxiety, right? Do a relaxation skill, expose myself, prevent myself from avoiding. And then once I've mastered that, move up the ladder. Flooding, research has shown that this is actually the most effective behavioral technique you can use for managing specific anxieties. Remember, this is for things that are specific, like like I said, specific, not for like general, like if you're struggling with worry or generalized anxieties and such. That's more of a diffuse type of anxiety. Not so much. This might not be as helpful for those type of things. But flooding, all flooding is you're basically exposing yourself to whatever you're anxious about, or anxious about, for a longer duration of time without avoiding, without escaping. You're fighting against that urge to escape. I give a quick example. I'm not actually proud of this, but I used to be supremely afraid of snails when I was young. I don't know what it was about snails, but I used to be. I don't know if it was because they were slimy or what it was, but I used to be afraid of snails. And I remember one day my sister brought over a friend, and I think her and her sister, they're about we're 3 years apart, and I saw her friend just playing with snails in the snails in the backyard. She was playing with them. She had them in her fingers. She was enjoying them. There was no fear. There was no anxiety, and that kind of motivated me to like, man, she's playing with them, then I can go play with them, So, or I can handle like anxieties. Snail. So I go into my backyard and I pick the biggest snail I could find. And I was supremely anxious. This is something that made me supremely anxious. And I just held the snail in my hand. And there was so much of an urge to throw that snail down or put it down and not do this again. But I fought against that. I made sure I looked at the snail crawling in my hand. I walked around with the snail. And I did this for about 20 minutes. And what ended up happening is habituation happened. My anxiety response decreased over time to the point where extinction happened. I did not feel any, from that point on, I never got anxious around snails anymore. So that's flooding. Imaginary exposure, that's exposing yourself, doing exposure in your head, exposure via observing. This is not as effective as live exposure, but you can watch somebody model how to deal with a specific anxiety situation. And then you expose yourself to that specific situation, or maybe watch a video. So that'd be like me watching a video of someone handling snails and then me going to do it. Interoceptive exposure is not something you should do on your own. This is something you would do with a professional. This is particularly good for people who have panic attacks. A lot of times the actual anxiety comes from experiencing the anxiety. Like a lot of people get anxiety about experiencing anxiety because it feels so unpleasant, or it feels so bad. We dwell on how physically draining it is and uncomfortable it is, that we, like I said, we experience anxiety about the actual symptom. So a therapist who uses interoceptive exposure is going to basically have the individual elicit the anxiety or panic. So they would have the person create panic, and the person, the idea is the person's just going to sit with those symptoms, for the purpose of realizing you can handle this. This is not so bad. Your anxiety, them symptoms, they may feel uncomfortable, but you're not going to die from them. So that's something, once again, this is not something you would do by yourself. And then behavioral experiments and engaging in problem solving is another thing. So there's some lifestyle changes also. I want you to think about, like, what are you putting in your body? Nutrition impacts your level of anxiety experience also. You want to stay away, as much as possible, stay away from fried foods. Greasy foods. A lot of people don't realize this, but like greasy and fried foods, they're heavy on your digestive system. It creates a lot of tension and stress on your digestive system, which makes you more likely to experience anxiety. Eating carbohydrates increase levels of serotonin, which have a calming effect. So eating breakfast that includes some type of protein, drinking a lot of water. Limit or avoiding alcohol. Now, alcohol is going to have, initially, it's going to have like a relaxing effect, but there's a rebound effect that happens with alcohol, because alcohol is going to affect GABA, and low GABA is actually related to anxiety. And alcohol is going to mess with the neurotransmitter GABA, and it's going to actually, when GABA levels decrease, that's going to trigger anxiety. So that's something to think about, also. So alcohol, limit or avoiding alcohol, limited or avoiding caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant. So of course, like if you struggle with anxiety and you're drinking a lot of Red Bulls and Monsters and stuff, that's going to worsen your anxiety experience. Eating foods high in omega-3 fatty acids, so like Alaskan salmon is something to eat. Eating beans, fruits, nuts, berries, and veggies, because they're rich in antioxidants. So those are things you can do in terms of lifestyle changes to help with anxiety. Getting enough sleep, okay? Quantity and quality of sleep is important. Spending a lot of time in REM sleep is actually helpful, right? And one thing is, like, if you're a student and you have a test the next day, you want to get into REM sleep. You want to spend a lot of time in REM sleep, because REM sleep actually helps consolidate the stuff you learn in memory. So these are just some of the things you can do. Fix a bedtime and awakening time. Avoid napping during the day. Avoid alcohol 4 to 6 hours before bedtime. Reserve your bed for sleep and only sleep. Try to, relaxation exercise before bed. Avoid caffeine before bed. And try not to take your worries into bed also. So this is, sleep is really important, man, because if you're not getting enough sleep, enough quality sleep, it's hard to fight off anxiety. It's a lot of times you might wake up edgy, and you might wake up irritable, on edge and such. So, like I said, build your own anxiety toolkit. One tool does not fit all, right? So, I kind of sped through a lot of this, but one tool does not fit all. You want to experiment with different activities and behaviors to find what works for you, right? I have a list of pleasurable activities that I give to students, relaxing activities. There's so many things you could do that maybe going to a coffee shop, maybe not now because of COVID, but, back in the day, going to a coffee shop, going to that park, going to the pond, and the such. Find what works for you, taking a bubble bath, going and get a massage. Increase physical activity. I know this is, once again, cliche therapist talk, but one of the first things I encourage students to do that struggle with anxiety is, hey, let's try to engage in some type of exercise. Reason why is because exercise has a physiological impact on you in terms of your anxiety. When you exercise, there's a release of those feel-good hormones, those hormones that make you feel good, and that's going to override that anxiety. Remember, reciprocal inhibition. So actually exercising does help. I know it seems like simple and such, but that's a simple solution to a complex problem that you can engage in. I know it's kind of hard now because of COVID, but finding some type of way to increase your activity levels. Engaging in self-care, taking care of yourself. Get organized. I'm naturally not a really organized person, but when I find myself really unorganized, I'm super anxious. So, get organized. Organized physical space allows you to have, experience organization mentally and such. Draw, paint, color, try a new hobby. I went over all that. Take a walk in the park and so on. Anything you can find that can initiate some type of relaxation, initiate that parasympathetic nervous system. Focus on what you can control and what you can't control. A lot of our anxiety is actually based off us trying to exert control in situations that we have no control. It creates frustration, it creates stress, and it creates anxiety. So once again, staying in the here and now. I can't control what happens in the future, but I can control what happens now. What are some things I can control now? So that helps. It helps you feel more in control. That helps you feel less anxiety. Utilize your social support network. Sometimes it surprises me that a lot of students, a lot of your peers and such, they have great social support networks, but they don't utilize them because they're so embarrassed about their anxiety and so they feel so much shame about their anxiety. Let's try to fight off that, and then take care of stress. I mean, stress, anxiety, and fear are three different emotions. A lot of times we use those terms interchangeably. They're three different emotions. But one thing is, the more stressed we are, the more likely we're going to experience anxiety. The more likely we're going to experience anxiety and such. So when should I seek out help? I went over this You know, think about how much it's impacting your life. You know, how much distress is it causing you? Is it causing other mental health issues? You know, one thing that's comorbid with a lot of anxiety disorders, or, you know, just the feeling of anxiety, is depression. They go, a lot of times they go hand in hand. Um, you know, so if your anxiety is starting to cause you to feel sad and lonely and such, then yeah, you know, it's time to seek out help from a professional at that point. Frequent panic attacks, like constant worrying, intrusive thoughts. You know, intrusive thoughts usually are characteristic of OCD obsessions. So if you're experiencing those, it's probably time to go seek out professional help if you're having those. Feeling on edge and restless. And then are you using like substances to cope with anxiety? You know, I know a lot of students that, or a lot of people, they might use alcohol, they might use marijuana and such to cope with um, the feeling of anxiety. And those things might help initially, right? They might work initially, but over time, those things are going to lose their effectiveness. So that's why, and they're not actually solving the problem; they're just helping mask the problem, right? And then another thing with marijuana is, once again, just like alcohol, initially it's gonna lead to like calming, maybe a sense of calm, but chronic marijuana usage is actually related to increased anxiety. There's a rebound effect with marijuana if you're using it chronically. So that's something to think about too. So I said a lot in a short amount of time, and I think we're out of time actually, and I didn't actually get to any questions. So hopefully the questions you did have, Eli was able to he was able to answer most of them. But I thank you for you know, attending this webinar and this presentation. And like I said, we're at the counseling center. You can, if you struggle with any level of anxiety, we're here to help you. And a lot of us have worked with you know, many levels of anxiety, from students who struggle with mild anxiety to students who struggle with severe anxiety, panic disorder, you know, OCD, generalized anxiety, and so on. So, and we also have a group that's specific for students who struggle with anxiety too. All right, thank you.